Ellen Harper woke to the sound of meadowlarks outside her small Montana cabin, the kind of morning chorus that reminded her why she'd traded city life for this quiet corner of Big Sky country. At 72, she'd settled into a routine as steady as the seasons, brewing a pot of Folgers coffee, black, no frills, then stepping onto her creaky porch to check the vegetable garden she'd nursed through years of harsh winters and fleeting summers. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, carried on a breeze that rustled the cottonwoods lining her property. She pulled an old flannel jacket tighter around her shoulders, its faded plaid a relic from decades past, and grabbed a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird from the porch table. The pages were dog-eared, the spine cracked, but she loved it that way, something real to hold on to in a world gone digital. 40 years ago, Ellen had been a star engineer, part of the team that built the biogrid, a marvel of American ingenuity that powered the nation and stored collective memories through tiny implants most folks now carried. It was sold as a gift to the aging. Relive your best days whenever you want it. But Ellen saw it differently. She'd walked away from that life after her husband, James, passed, blaming the grid for turning his private moments, their moments, into data points in some soulless system. Now, she lived off the grid in every sense. No implant, no smart devices, just a crank radio for emergencies and a landline that barely worked. Out here, she could almost pretend the 21st century hadn't happened. She shuffled down to the garden, her boots crunching on gravel, and knelt to inspect the tomatoes, ruby red and heavy, ready for picking. It was grunt work, but it kept her hands busy and her mind quiet. She'd just snipped a few leaves when a sob broke the stillness. Across the split-rail fence, her neighbor Mary Carter, 80 and frail as a sparrow, sat crumpled on the grass, her thin sweater no match for the morning chill. "I can't picture their faces," Mary wailed, clutching at her gray hair. "My kids. Ellen, I don't know what they look like anymore." Ellen froze, pruning shears still in hand. Mary had been a schoolteacher once, sharp as a tack, always bragging about her 3 grown kids scattered across the states: Portland, Austin, Raleigh. Like most folks her age, she'd gotten the grid implant years back, a lifeline to those memories. Seeing her now, lost and trembling, hit Ellen like a punch to the gut. She remembered James in his final days, hooked up to machines, his eyes glazing over as the grid archived his life. She'd begged him not to sign up for it, but he'd wanted to hold on to their fishing trips on Flathead Lake, their quiet evenings by the fire. In the end, it hadn't mattered. He was gone, and the grid kept what was left. "Mary, come on, let's get you inside," Ellen called, her voice softer than she meant it to be. Mary didn't move, just kept muttering names: Jake, Sarah, Emily, like a prayer she couldn't finish. Ellen crossed the yard, helped the old woman up, and guided her back to her little clapboard house next door. Inside, it smelled of mothballs and stale cookies. Ellen settled Mary into an armchair, draped a quilt over her knees, and stoked the wood stove. "It's gonna be okay," she lied, knowing damn well it wasn't. Whatever was wrong with Mary's head, it wasn't just old age. Back at her own place, Ellen sank into a kitchen chair, the coffee gone cold in her mug. She stared at the scratched oak table, tracing a nick from when James had dropped the skillet years ago. The memory stung, raw and unfiltered, the way it should be, not sanitized by some tech wizardry. She'd built a wall around herself out here, brick by brick, but Mary's breakdown had cracked it open. She was still brooding when the doorbell rang, a jarring buzz that hadn't sounded in months. Walter Grayson stood on her porch, his silver hair thinning, his Carhartt jacket patched at the elbows. At 75, he looked every bit the retired surgeon he was: steady hands, tired eyes, and a no-nonsense set to his jaw. He held an old flip phone, the kind you couldn't even buy anymore. "Ellen, we're in deep shit," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "The grid's down kaput. Millions of folks like Mary are losing their minds, literally. I need you to fix this." Ellen crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm done with that life, Walt. You know that." Her tone was flint-hard, but her eyes flickered with doubt. Walter stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You helped build the damn thing. You're the only one who knows how it ticks. If we don't act, a whole generation's history, our history, goes dark." She slammed the door, the sound echoing through the cabin. But as she leaned against it, Walter's words sank in, heavy as a stone. She thought of Mary, of James, of all the people tethered to a system she'd once believed in. The past wasn't just knocking, it was kicking the door down. Ellen glanced at the garden through the window, the tomatoes still waiting. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure she'd be back to pick them. Ellen Harper couldn't sleep that night, the weight of Walter's words pressing down like a Montana snowdrift. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the knotty pine ceiling, the cabin's silence broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood. Mary's vacant eyes haunted her, and so did the memory of James, his voice, his laugh, the way he'd hum Johnny Cash tunes while frying trout in their old cast-iron skillet. The grid had promised to preserve those pieces of him, but all it did was leave her feeling robbed. Now, Walter was dragging her back into that world, and damn if she didn't hate him for it. She kicked off the quilt, pulled on her boots, and shuffled to the kitchen, where the clock glowed 3:17 a.m. in dim red digits. Coffee wouldn't cut it. She needed something stronger. She rummaged in a cabinet, found a half-empty bottle of Jim Beam, and poured a splash into a chipped mug. The burn steadied her nerves, but it didn't quiet the questions. By dawn, she was out in the garden, yanking weeds with a vengeance, trying to outrun her thoughts. The tomatoes stared back, accusing her of cowardice. She'd built this life to escape the grid, to keep her memories hers, raw, messy, real. But what good was that if people like Mary were losing everything? She wiped sweat from her brow, her hands caked with dirt, when the landline rang. A shrill, outdated sound that made her jump. She trudged inside, knowing who it'd be before she even picked up. "Ellen, don't hang up," Walter's voice crackled through the receiver. "I'm at St. Patrick's in Missoula. You need to see this." She didn't want to go. Missoula was a 2-hour drive, and the last thing she needed was a front-row seat to chaos. But Walter's tone, urgent, almost desperate, gnawed at her. She grabbed her keys, an old Ford pickup keychain James had loved, and climbed into her 98 F-150. The engine sputtered to life, and she hit the road, Highway 93 stretching out like a ribbon through the Bitterroot Valley. The radio stayed off. She didn't need news to tell her things were bad. The empty gas stations and abandoned cars along the way said enough. St. Patrick's Hospital was a madhouse when she pulled into the lot. Ambulances idled out front, their lights flashing silently, while folks in scrubs rushed stretchers through the double doors. Ellen parked near a row of cottonwoods, their leaves turning gold in the late September chill, and spotted Walter waiting by the entrance. He looked worse than yesterday, shirt rumpled, eyes bloodshot, like he'd been up all night stitching wounds or breaking bad news. "Took you long enough," he said, waving her inside. She followed, the antiseptic smell hitting her like a slap, stirring memories of James's last days. The ER was packed, but not with the usual broken bones or heart attacks. Old folks, 60s, 70s, 80s, sat in wheelchairs or slumped on gurneys, staring blankly or muttering nonsense. A woman with a walker clutched a nurse's arm, sobbing, "Where's my bill? I know he's here somewhere." A man in a Vietnam vet cap rocked back and forth, whispering names Ellen couldn't catch, his past slipping away like Mary's. Walter led her to a corner where a whiteboard tracked the mess, grid failure, memory loss cases. The numbers were climbing, dozens in Missoula alone. "It's not just here," Walter said, his voice low. "Reports are coming in from Boise, Spokane, even Denver. The grid's down everywhere, and these people are unraveling." Ellen crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "What the hell do you expect me to do about it? I haven't touched that tech in decades." Walter grabbed her elbow, steering her to a quiet hallway. "You designed the damn thing, Ellen. You know its guts, the redundancies, the fail-safes. This isn't a glitch, it's a collapse. The grid's not just power, it's their souls, their stories. If we don't fix it, they're gone." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "You really gonna let that happen?" She yanked her arm free, pacing the linoleum floor. "I walked away for a reason, Walt. That system took James from me, turned him into a file on a server. I'm not going back." But even as she said it, she saw Mary's face again, heard the vet's whispers. Walter sighed, rubbing his temples. "I get it. I do. But you're the best shot we've got. I can't do this alone. I'm a doc, not a techie. We need the old crew." The old crew. Ruth, the pilot who'd hauled grid equipment across the Rockies. Henry, the reporter who'd sniffed out its dirty secrets. They'd all scattered after the project, like Ellen, carrying their own scars. She stopped pacing, her boots scuffing the floor. Even if I say yes, we're fossils. The world's moved on. Walter smirked, a flicker of his old grit showing. Fossils who built the future. We've got more in us than you think. Ellen stared out a window at the parking lot, the cottonwoods swaying in the wind. She thought of her garden, her cabin, the life she'd carved out. Then she thought of James, not the grid's version, but the real him, laughing over a campfire. If she did this, it wouldn't be for the tech. It'd be for the people it was supposed to serve. Fine, she said, turning back to Walter. But we do it my way. Get Ruth and Henry on the line. I'm not moving till we're all in. Walter nodded, already dialing. Ellen stepped outside, the cold air biting her cheeks. She wasn't ready for this fight, not by a long shot, but she'd be damned if she let a generation fade away on her watch. Ellen Harper leaned against the tailgate of her '98 Ford pickup, parked at an abandoned airstrip just outside Missoula. The late September wind whipped through the tall grass, carrying the faint whine of a single-engine plane circling overhead. Walter stood beside her, squinting into the gray sky, his flip phone pressed to his ear. "Ruth's on her way down," he said, pocketing the device. "Henry's harder to pin. Guy's been off the radar since that expose on the grid went south." Ellen nodded, her arms crossed tight against the chill. She hadn't seen Ruth or Henry in decades, but if they were half as stubborn as she remembered, they'd show. The team that built the biogrid back in the 2030s, that is, had been a tight crew, forged in late-night coffee runs and arguments over circuit boards. Now, they were her last shot at fixing this mess. The plane touched down, a beat-up Cessna 172 that looked like it had seen better days. Ruth Callahan climbed out, her silver ponytail swinging as she hauled a duffel bag over her shoulder. At 70, she still moved like the Air Force pilot she'd been, shoulders square, stride purposeful. Her leather jacket was patched at the elbows, and her boots crunched the gravel as she approached. "Ellen Harper, you old coot," she said, a grin cracking her weathered face. "Thought you'd be 6 feet under by now." Ellen smirked, shaking her hand. "Takes more than time to bury me, Ruthie." They piled into the truck, Ruth taking shotgun while Walter squeezed into the narrow back seat. "So the grid's toast?" Ruth asked, lighting a cigarette despite Ellen's glare. "Heard it on the ham radio. Folks losing their marbles from here to Boise." Walter nodded grimly. "It's worse than that. Whole damn system's dark, and it's spreading. We need to figure out why, and fast." Ruth exhaled a plume of smoke, staring out the window at the passing pines. "I flew grid parts all over these mountains back in the day. Kept me sane after Nam, reliving those runs through the implant. Now it's gone. I feel every ache again." Ellen kept her eyes on the road, her grip tightening on the wheel. She didn't say it, but she envied Ruth's ability to lean on the tech without losing herself. Their next stop was a dive bar off I-90, a squat building with peeling paint and a neon sign flickering Bud Light. Henry Voss was waiting inside, hunched over a booth with a laptop that looked older than Ellen's truck. At 68, he was the youngest of the crew, but his years as a muckraking journalist had aged him. Deep lines etched his face, and his glasses hung crooked on his nose. He glanced up as they slid into the booth, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Well, hell, it's the gang. Thought I'd dodged you fossils for good." Ellen slid him a coffee, black as tar. "We need your brain, Henry. Walter says the grid's down, and I'm betting you've got dirt on why." Henry leaned back, sipping the coffee with a grimace. "Always figured that thing bite us in the ass. Been digging since it crashed yesterday. Word is, a group called New Dawn's behind it. Bunch of young hotshots out of Silicon Valley. They're pushing a reboot to wipe the old data, start fresh. Say folks like us are clogging the system with our baggage." He tapped the laptop, pulling up a blurry photo of a woman in her 30s, sharp jaw, dark hair, eyes cold as steel. Meet Sasha Klein, their ringleader. MIT grad, tech prodigy, thinks she's God's gift to the future. Ellen studied the image, a knot forming in her gut. Wipe the old data? That's millions of lives, our lives. Ruth stubbed out her cigarette on the table, leaving a scorch mark. "Little punks. I'd like to see him survive a winter up here without our baggage." Walter rubbed his chin, his surgeon's calm kicking in. "If they've got control of the grid, they're not just rebooting, they're erasing. We need to hit them where it hurts." Henry smirked, closing the laptop. Got a lead. New Dawn's holed up in a data center near Reno. But they've got muscle, private security, drones, the works. The bar door swung open, and 3 kids, couldn't have been over 25, strode in, all hoodies and attitude. One wore a pin with a Rising Sun logo, New Dawn's mark. They clocked the group in the booth, and the tallest, a wiry guy with a buzz cut, sauntered over. "You geezers talking shop?" he sneered, eyeing Henry's laptop. "Grid's dead, and good riddance. Time for fresh blood." Ruth stood, slow and deliberate, her pilot's glare locking on him. "Kid, I was dodging flak over Hanoi while you were in diapers. Step off." He laughed, but his buddies tugged him back, sensing trouble. They left, but not before tossing a crumpled flyer on the table. New Dawn. Reclaim the future. Ellen picked it up, her jaw tight. "They're not just tech nerds, they're a damn cult." Henry nodded, stashing the flyer. "And they've got followers. We're not just up against Sasha. We're up against a generation that thinks we're obsolete." Walter cracked his knuckles, a rare spark in his tired eyes. "Then we show him what fossils can do. Reno's our target. You in?" Ruth grinned, lighting another cigarette. "Hell yes. I'll fly us in. Got a buddy with a hangar near Billings." Henry shrugged, adjusting his glasses. "I've got no scoop left to chase. Count me in." Ellen looked at them, her old crew, battered but unbroken. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "But we're not kids anymore. We play smart, or we don't play at all." Outside, the wind howled, and the sun dipped low. The fight was on, and Ellen felt it in her bones. This wasn't just about the grid. It was personal. Ellen Harper gripped the armrest of Ruth's rattling Cessna as it cut through the turbulent skies over Idaho, the engines drone a steady hum beneath the howl of the wind. The plane was a relic, patched with duct tape and prayers, but Ruth flew it like she'd never left the cockpit. Below, the landscape blurred, pine forests giving way to the scarred remains of small towns, their lights dimmed since the grid went dark. Walter sat in the back, poring over a road map scavenged from a gas station, while Henry typed furiously on his ancient laptop, chasing leads through spotty satellite signals. They were headed for Reno, a trip that stretched over 2 grueling days. But first, a pit stop in Twin Falls to refuel and regroup. Ellen's stomach churned, not from the turbulence, but from the weight of what they were chasing. A ghost in the machine she'd helped build. They landed on a cracked runway outside Twin Falls, the sun sinking behind the Sawtooth Mountains, painting the sky a bruised purple. Ruth killed the engine, and the silence hit hard. No hum of power lines, no distant traffic, just the whistle of wind through sagebrush. "Fuel's gonna be a problem," Ruth said, wiping grease from her hands. "Grid's down, pumps are dry. We'll have to siphon what we can." Ellen nodded, scanning the horizon. A pickup rolled up, an old farmer in overalls offering a 5-gallon jerry can of gas for a few bucks and a promise to stick it to those city bastards. They paid him in cash, real paper, a rarity these days, and got back in the air, the Cessna groaning under the extra weight. The flight to Nevada was brutal. A storm rolled in, lashing the plane with rain and lightning that lit up the night like a 4th of July show gone wrong. Ruth wrestled the controls, cursing under her breath, while Ellen stared out at the black void, her mind drifting to James. She'd last seen this stretch of desert when they'd worked together at a grid facility near Fallon, long nights testing relays, stealing kisses in the break room. He'd loved the tech, believed it'd save the world. She'd believed in him. Now, she was chasing his ghost across the same sands, wondering if she'd lost more than just him to the damn thing. They touched down at dawn on a dusty airstrip outside Fallon, the facility looming ahead, a squat, concrete bunker half buried in the dunes. It was one of the grid's original hubs, abandoned after upgrades moved west, but Ellen knew it like the back of her hand. "There's a backup server here," she said, leading the group through a rusted gate. "If anything's left of the old system, it'll be inside." The door creaked open, revealing a tomb of flickering fluorescent lights and cobweb consoles. Henry plugged in his laptop, muttering about encryption, while Ruth kept watch with a .38 revolver she'd pulled from her duffel. Walter handed Ellen a flashlight, his steady hands a quiet comfort. She found the server room down a narrow hall, its hum long silenced. Dust coated the racks, but one panel blinked faintly, a lifeline. She hooked up a portable drive, her fingers trembling as she punched in old access codes. The screen flared to life, and there it was, a snapshot of the grid's core, frozen before the collapse. But accessing it meant facing something she'd buried deep. A prompt flashed, memory verification required. She hesitated, then clicked, and James's face filled the screen. Grainy footage from a security cam, him smiling at her over a workbench, circa 2042. Her chest tightened. "Ellen, you okay?" Walter asked, his voice soft. She nodded, lying through her teeth, and let the memory play. It wasn't just a clip, it was a flood. James laughing, tinkering with a relay, then coughing, his lungs failing from years of desert dust. Her begging him to quit, him refusing, saying, "This is bigger than us." Then the end, him flatlining in that same room, her screaming at the medics while the grid archived it all. Tears stung her eyes, but she pushed through, downloading the backup. The data spilled out, logs showing a reformat command triggered from Silicon Valley, timestamped 3 days ago. New Dawn hadn't just crashed the grid, they'd rewritten it, targeting the oldest memory banks first. "Son of a bitch," Henry said, reading over her shoulder. "Sasha's crew did this on purpose, wiped the seniors to optimize the system." Ruth chambered a round in her revolver. "I'd optimize her face with this." Ellen shut the drive down, the screen fading to black. "They're in Reno, finishing the job. That's where we go next." Walter frowned, folding his map. "We're running on fumes. Plane won't make it without a miracle." Ruth grinned, a wild glint in her eye. "Then we find one. I've got a buddy in Elko with a fuel stash. We roll hard, we get there." They stepped outside, the Nevada sun climbing high, baking the sand. Ellen clutched the drive, James's ghost still lingering in her mind. This wasn't just about saving the grid anymore. It was about saving what it had stolen, what it had promised. The group piled back into the Cessna, Ruth gunning the engine. As they lifted off, Ellen looked down at the bunker, a relic of her past now pointing her future. New Dawn thought they could erase her generation, but she'd be damned if she let them. The fight was bigger than she'd bargained for, and she was all in. Ellen Harper's boots crunched on the gravel outside a sprawling data center in Reno, its sleek glass towers a stark contrast to the dusty Nevada scrubland. The sun hung low, casting long shadows as Ruth landed the Cessna on a makeshift strip a mile out, her buddy's fuel stash barely getting them there. The team, Ellen, Ruth, Walter, and Henry, huddled behind a rusted shipping container, eyeing the compound. Drones buzzed overhead, their red lights blinking like fireflies, while armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Inside, Sasha Klein and her New Dawn crew were finishing the grid reformat, erasing the last of the old data, millions of lives, including James's echoes. Ellen clutched the portable drive from Fallon, her knuckles white. "We're outgunned," she muttered. Ruth smirked, checking her .38. Not outsmarted. They'd planned on the fly. Ruth would take out the drones. Henry would hijack their comms. Walter would cover Ellen while she hacked the core. It was a long shot, but they weren't kids anymore. Long shots were all they had. Ruth slipped away first, scaling a maintenance tower with a crowbar and a coil of rope, her pilot's grit unshaken. Ellen led the others through a drainage ditch, the stink of stagnant water clinging to their clothes. They reached a side entrance, a service door left ajar by some careless tech. Inside, the hum of servers filled the air, a sterile maze of blinking lights and coolant pipes. Henry found a comms hub, plugging his laptop into a tangle of cables. "Give me 5 minutes," he said, fingers flying over the keys. Ellen and Walter pushed deeper, ducking behind racks as guards paced nearby. She spotted the core, a glowing column of quantum processors, Sasha's crown jewel. Above, Ruth's handiwork paid off. A drone crashed outside, sparking chaos as alarms blared. Guards rushed to the breach, giving Ellen a window. She hooked the drive to the core, her old codes still working, barely. The screen lit up, showing the reformat at 92%. "We're cutting it close," Walter whispered, his pocket knife out, ready for trouble. Sasha appeared on a catwalk overhead, her voice sharp over the din. "You're too late, fossils. This is evolution. Your time's up." She was younger than Ellen expected, all angles and arrogance, her dark hair pulled tight. Ellen glared up, her voice steady. "You don't get to erase us, kid. Those memories built this world." Sasha laughed, tapping a tablet. Built it. They're holding it back. We're making room for the future. Ellen's screen flashed a warning. Override requires admin purge. To stop the reformat, she'd have to wipe her own grid imprint. Every memory of James she'd locked away. Her old admin credentials were the only key left to unlock the core, a relic of the grid's first days. Outside, Ruth took down another drone, its wreckage slamming into a guard post. Henry's voice crackled through stolen earpieces. Comms are live. I'm broadcasting this to every ham radio in the West. Let him hear the truth. The guards regrouped, closing in, and Walter tackled one, his surgeon's precision landing a punch. Ellen hesitated, her finger hovering over the command. James flooded her mind. His grin over a campfire, his hand on hers during a Montana blizzard, his last breath in that Fallon bunker. She'd fought to keep him hers, not the grid's. But if she didn't act, millions like Mary would lose everything. Screw it, she muttered, hitting the key. The system demanded confirmation. Purge personal data? She clicked yes, and pain ripped through her. A digital gut punch as James's face dissolved from the screen, then her memory. The core word, the reformat halting at 98%. Data streams reversed, flooding back to implants nationwide. Ellen slumped against the console, her mind blank where James had been. She knew she'd lost something vital, but couldn't name it. Just a hollow ache. Sasha screamed, lunging down the catwalk, but her crew faltered as the locals stormed the gates, their loyalty cracking under the chaos. Ruth intercepted, pinning her with a chokehold. Stay down, princess, Ruth growled. Guards swarmed, but Henry's broadcast had hit. Static voices on the comms reported civilian backups converging on Reno. Walter dragged Ellen to her feet, blood on his knuckles. You did it, he said, his calm breaking into relief. She nodded, dazed, the victory tasting like ash. The core stabilized, the grid flickering back online, but her piece of it was gone. They fought their way out, Ruth dragging a cuffed Sasha, Henry limping from a stray baton hit. Outside, the drones were grounded, and headlights dotted the horizon. Locals, roused by Henry's call, rolling in with pickups and rifles. New Dawn's guards scattered, outnumbered. Ellen sank onto the gravel, the portable drive still in her hand, now just a dead weight. Walter checked her pulse, ever the doc. You okay? He asked. She shrugged, staring at the stars. I don't know what I gave up, Walt. But it worked, didn't it? He nodded, clapping her shoulder. Yeah, millions owe you their pasts. Ruth hauled Sasha to the Cessna, muttering about teaching respect, while Henry patched his laptop, already drafting the story. The data center glowed behind them, a monument to their win and her loss. Ellen climbed aboard, the ache in her chest a stranger she couldn't name. She'd stopped the purge, but at a cost only she'd never fully grasp. The plane lifted off, Reno shrinking below, and she wondered if James would have been proud or pissed she'd paid his price. Ellen Harper sat on the edge of the Cessna's cargo hold as it taxied to a stop on that dusty Reno airstrip, the hum of the grid's revival buzzing faintly in the distance. The data center glowed against the night sky, its servers alive again, pumping memories back to millions of folks who'd been on the brink of losing them. Locals and pickups circled the compound, their headlights cutting through the dark, keeping New Dawn's remnants at bay. Ruth climbed out, dragging a handcuffed Sasha Klein behind her, the young tech prodigy's defiance reduced to a scowl. Move it, sunshine, Ruth snapped, shoving her toward a waiting sheriff's deputy. Ellen watched, her hands resting limp in her lap, the portable drive discarded beside her, a useless husk now that its job was done. Walter knelt next to her, checking her over with a doctor's eye. You're still in one piece, he said, his voice rough but warm. Pulse is steady, no concussion. Hell of a fight, Ellen. She nodded absently, her gaze drifting to the stars. Something was missing, a hole where James used to be, but she couldn't pin it down, like waking from a dream you can't recall. It worked, right? She asked, her tone flat. Walter clapped her shoulder. Yeah, grid's back online. Folks from Seattle to St. Louis are waking up with their pasts intact. You saved him. She forced a thin smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Henry limped over, his glasses cracked, laptop tucked under his arm. Broadcast hit every frequency west of the Mississippi, he said, a tired grin breaking through. Sasha's little cult's toast. People aren't taking kindly to their history being trashed. He pulled out the New Dawn flyer, now crumpled, and tossed it into the dirt. Stories already spreading. Might even get a book out of this. Ruth snorted, lighting a cigarette. Better make me look good, scribbler. The deputy hauled Sasha into a squad car, her parting shot ringing out. This isn't over. You dinosaurs can't stop progress. Ellen stared after her, the words hollow against the victory they'd clawed from her grasp. The group gathered at a roadside diner off I-80 that night, a neon-lit joint serving greasy burgers and bottomless coffee. They slid into a vinyl booth, the jukebox crooning Patsy Cline's Crazy in the background. Ellen picked at her fries, the chatter of truckers and locals washing over her. Ruth raised a mug. To fossils who kick ass, she said, and they clinked. Coffee for Ellen and Walter, whiskey for Ruth and Henry. It was a quiet celebration, the kind you have when you've won but paid too much to feel it. What now? Walter asked, leaning back. Ruth shrugged. Got a flight to Alaska lined up. Buddy's got a bush plane needs fixing. Henry adjusted his glasses. Back to Boise. Book won't write itself. Ellen stayed silent, staring into her coffee. The grid was fixed, Sasha was done, but that ache in her chest wouldn't quit. She'd given up something big, something that used to define her, but it was gone, a shadow she couldn't chase. Walter nudged her. You heading home? She nodded slowly. Yeah, garden's probably a mess by now. They laughed, a soft, tired sound, and then went their ways, Ruth to the airstrip, Henry to a Greyhound stop, Walter to his old Suburban. Ellen climbed into her Ford, the drive back to Montana stretching ahead like a lifeline. She rolled into her cabin at dawn, the Bitterroot Valley waking up in hues of gold and gray. The garden was overgrown, tomatoes sagging on the vines, but she didn't care. She dropped her keys on the table, the silence of the place wrapping around her like an old friend. The landline blinked with messages, Walter checking in, a neighbor asking about Mary, but she ignored them, stepping outside with a shovel. She dug a hole near the porch, her hands steady despite the exhaustion, and planted a sapling she'd grabbed from a roadside stand. Some kind of maple, the guy said. It felt right, putting something new in the ground after all she'd lost. Mary came by later, her eyes clear again, a shaky smile on her face. The grid's reboot had reached her implant overnight, bringing Jake and Sarah back to her. I remember my kids now, she said, hugging Ellen tight. Jake's got that scar from falling off his bike. Sarah's got my nose. Thank you. Ellen hugged back, the warmth a small balm. Glad you're okay, she replied, meaning it. Mary left, and Ellen sat on the porch, watching the sapling sway in the breeze. The ache was still there, a stranger in her bones, but it didn't own her. She'd done what she set out to do, kept a generation from fading, even if her own piece of it was gone. Days later, a package arrived. Henry's book draft, scribbled with a note. You're the hero, Ellen. She set it down, stepping outside as the sun dipped low. The maple's leaves caught the light, a promise of growth. Ellen didn't know what she'd lost anymore, but she knew what she'd gained. A fight won, a world saved, a mark left. It wasn't James, but it was enough. She grabbed her shears, the past behind her, the future in her hands.